When I was a child, I remember my grandmother had a little plastic puzzle. Some people call it a sliding puzzle, sliding tile puzzle, or a 15 tile puzzle or game, because there are 15 tiles that can be scrambled. You have to put them in numerical order from 1 to 15 by sliding them with one square being open at any given time. And you can only slide a tile into that open square. So I thought in terms of working with grids, this would be a great example to develop. So that's our project, to create the sliding tile puzzle game. I'll provide all the graphics for you. Each of the tiles themselves are an image that's imported in and can be assigned to an image button. I also have graphics for the icon, for the splash screen, and then also to make it a little fancier, we'll do an image on the background of just basically a wooden tabletop, and then I've got some images for the buttons for new game and play, just to make them look a little bit nicer. And then the moves and the elapsed time labels at the bottom are actually labels on top of an image. And I provide the images for those. I called those basically windows. And then the title for the game. So all those images are provided for you in Canvas. So this is really a practice in using the grid layouts. As I said, we'll add our images, we'll use an image button. We will layer images and labels within a grid. That's one of the great things about a grid, is you can put things on top of one another. We'll use a progress bar. As seen here, we're going to hide the puzzle as we set up the new puzzle, and then have a progress bar that shows the progress of setting up that puzzle. So we're going to randomly set up the puzzle. We will track and display the number of moves as well as the elapsed time. We want to allow the play of the exact same game. There's a little replay button here. So you can play the game, check your number of moves, the number score, and hand it off to a family member or friend and see if they can beat your score. So that's what the project will do. We'll talk about the grid layout here in a minute. So some tips along the way is to remember to set your build action when you include the images, the icons, and the splash screen. I use image button list to hold a record of all the tiles, the solution, so I can compare the current tiles, and then another one to save the setup from once it creates a new game so you can easily replay the same game. I populate those class level image lists after I initialize the components. I created a method to swap two tiles. It makes it easy. Just call that method. And the timer, though, was really challenging. And I ended up using a stopwatch and an iDispatch timer. And the iDispatch timer allows us to run the timer on another thread. The stopwatch simply makes the math very easy to do in terms of how much time has elapsed. In the constructor, I set up the timer, and I have two methods, one called start the clock and one called update clock. And those are called during gameplay. And then with each move the user makes, we want to check and see if they've solved the puzzle. So there's a check for win method. And there's a little XML snippet to help you with setting up the image buttons within the grid. Testing your data, make sure you play the game several times. The winner's notified when they solve it, and you're showing the number of moves and the time elapsed, and allowing the same game to be played again. Let me show you the game running. So here's the game in an iPhone simulator. I'm going to click New Game. So it's preparing the puzzle. So there's the new game. The game stopwatch starts immediately. And we're done playing the game. It tells us we did a great job. Shows us our elapsed time, the number of moves, and we could then replay the same game or play a new game. If you'd like to try this on your own, be my guest, but this is a little more complicated app than we've created in the past. And so I just invite you to go ahead and watch my code review and learn as you watch over my shoulder. To start, download the asset zip file that I provided in Canvas, unzip it, and then add in the app icons. There's a sliding tiles SVG and an app icon fig sliding tiles SVG. Make sure you set the app icon to a build action of MAUI icon and the app icon fig to none. There are a lot of images. So you're going to install all of these images and then set the build action to MAUI image on those, and then also the splash, and set the build action to MAUI splash. In the CS project file, you'll want to change the MAUI icon reference to app icon underscore sliding tiles.svg. Let me just extend this down so you can see it. Do the foreground file of app icon underscore sliding tiles.svg. And then for the background, I use 7755AA and use that same color for the splash screen and set it to splash underscore sliding tiles.svg. You'll also want to make sure you go in and change the manifest on the Android so that it is at mipmap/app icon underscore sliding underscore tiles. And in the info P list, you want to do the same thing for the app icon assets, app icon underscore sliding underscore tiles dot app icon set. I would do all that, and I would just test in the emulator, make sure you're getting the icon and the splash screen. Remember, sometimes the splash screen doesn't quite work right on the iOS simulator once it's been changed. So now let's go in and look at the XAML for our main page. I just use the main page, and I set a background image source to the wood underscore bg.png. That was one of the images we brought in. That's going to give us that wood background, kind of a tabletop. I set the title to sliding tile puzzle, and I also set the shell navbar.isVisible equals false. That'll get rid of the navbar at the top, in which case you won't see the title sliding tile puzzle. We use the scroll view, and then inside the scroll view is our grid. I gave it a margin of 20 and horizontal options of fill. And we set up our grid row definitions. Let's take a look at those grid row definitions. The top row is going to be my title, and then I have a row that's 25 device independent units high. That's going to be the beginning of the frame for our puzzle. And then I have 4 rows that are 75 DIU each. Those are going to be our squares inside the puzzle, and another 25 DIU, which will be the bottom of the frame. And then I have a row for the buttons, that's 60, and a row for the feedback, that's 70, and then an auto, which is going to be everything remaining. And we might add additional controls down the road. Maybe we want to be able to pause the timer and so forth. But that auto will push everything up towards the top. Column definitions. I have asterisk on both the first and the last column, which will help us center everything. So those will be equal width, whatever width is needed. And then we have our column definitions of 25 to accommodate the frame, 475 columns to accommodate the squares, and then another 25 width column to accommodate the frame. I did a vertical stack layout, starting with grid row 0 and grid column 0, spanning 7 columns. Set the horizontal options to center and the vertical options to center, and a height request of 90. Inside that, then, I just simply added the image for the title, and the source there is title underscore 56150. Now, the reason I use a vertical stack layout there is initially I just had 2 labels, and you can see those commented out. And I wanted those one immediately underneath the other. So in this case, you really don't need the vertical stack layout. You could just put the image source with the row reference of 0 and a column reference of 0 and a grid column of span of 7, and then center it. Then I did an image source of tile underscore frame underscore B, starting in row 1, column 1, and expanding for 6 columns and 6 rows. Gave it an aspect of aspect fill, and that's going to be our border. Inside that then, or laying on top of that, are the 16 image buttons that present the 15 tiles and the blank square, which is slider 00 underscore tile. That's this very last one. That puts it all in order, 1 through 15, with the blank in the bottom right-hand corner. Then I have a horizontal stack. Again, grid row 7, column 1. Going to span 6 columns, and that's going to include our 2 buttons. So I have our two buttons, which are image buttons. I had brought in a source that I created these images in Photoshop. So I have a button underscore newgame.png and a button underscore replay.png. They're each 125 DIU wide and 40 units high, and I give them a quarter radius of 20. Set the border color to black and a border width of 3 on both of those, and the events here are clicked equals setup and clicked equals replay. I gave each one a shadow effect, and so there I don't have the closing tag for the image button until a little bit later, and inserted an ImageButton.shadow. Now that shadow is a brush object. We really haven't talked about the graphics of brushes, but we can set up a brush that's a color. In this case I use black. I set the offset of 10 units to the right and 10 units below, give it a radius of 20 and opacity of 90%. I did that on both of them. Then in grid row 8 I set up our feedback in terms of the moves and the elapsed time using overlaid views. In grid row 8 in column 1, I'm going to span 3 columns. This image is basically a window. It's a frame around a black centered area. And then on top of that, using the exact same specifications in terms of the grids and rows and the spans, I add a label that says moves. So this is going into the same area, but the difference here is the image above, I set the vertical options to end, and I set the vertical options on this one to start. Now you could swap those two, but basically that'll put the label above the image. Then I have another label called LBL Moves. That one I want to name, so I'm going to use that in code. And I'm going to set the text equal to 0, same column row settings, but again here the vertical options are end. It's going to overlay that label on top of the window. I do the same thing then for the elapsed time. I've got an image, a label above that, and a label that overlays the image. And the text there I set to 00:00.00. We're going to show minutes and seconds with hundredths of a second. And I gave it a name of LBL elapsed. Then I wanted to add an attribution as far as where the background photo came from. So it came from FW Studio off of pixels.com. And then the last one here is the image that hides the puzzle while we are randomly setting it up. So it overlaps the puzzle pieces up above, the image squares, and then layered on top of that, I put a progress bar. So you begin to see the importance of being able to use grids for layering things that you can't do in a stack layout. That's the value of the grid. So create the XML. Make sure you do stubs for the different events that need to be handled, for our buttons, and for the image buttons, which all have a clicked event of make move. So we have our image button for the new game is a clicked setup, clicked replay for our replay button, and then make move for all of our image buttons. And then test it and make sure that the interface looks good. And in the next video, I'll walk you through the C# code behind. If you just jumped into this video, you can see all the videos from the .NET MAUI Practicum playlist by clicking on the image in the lower right. And if you'd like to be alerted to future videos I create, you can click my picture in the top right to subscribe to the channel.